everybody! It is Unfinished Business Crafting Hour! And I, Erin, am going to lead you through painting miniatures, tabletop miniatures. My hope is that if you are new to painting miniatures, I can help you out, get to know the basics of what you'll need and what you will be doing, and I'm going to give you a couple of hot tips for how to make your miniatures look extra snazzy. So let's go. Okay, so these are the supplies that we are going to need. Obviously, you are going to need the mini that you are painting. You're also going to need a cup that you can use for water to clean your brushes. You will need a paper towel that you can use to dab your brushes off after you clean them. You will also need a disposable plate of some kind. So we'll be using this plate right here. And then you're going to need your paints and your brushes. I also put some other supplies over here that are going to be some optional extra things. Let's talk about brushes. So I recommend 4 brushes when you are doing mini painting. One is just any old brush that you are going to use to mix paints. So you don't really have to care about that brush. It doesn't have to be any brush in particular. It just has to be large enough to mix paints with. The other 3 are a larger brush, a medium brush, and a small brush. And of course, this is all in perspective to the size of the mini over here. So this large brush, quote unquote, that I have is... the bristles are maybe half the diameter of a penny or so. If I look at the medium brush, it's maybe 40% of the diameter of a penny. And then the small brush is maybe 25% of the diameter of a penny. It's all real tiny. So these brushes that I have, I don't really have super strong opinions about brushes as a thing. They just happen to be the brushes that are sold at Dice Dojo, which is a local game shop in Chicago. You should go if you haven't been and you're Chicago based. So this brush is actually a small dry brush from the Army Painter. We're not actually going to use it for dry brushing. I like to use it for normal painting because it has this cool little angle on it, which makes it a little easier to paint. And then for the middle brush, I have the Artificer layer from Citadel. Also something I picked up at Dice Dojo. And then the last one that I have is also an Army Painter brush. And it is the Insane Detail brush. As you can see, holding it against my hand here, it is really small. And in fact, not the smallest brush that they sell. I really like this sort of triangular design with the handle. It does help when you're trying to stably paint something super tiny to have a little bit of a sort of stable design for that kind of thing. So those are the brushes. As far as the paints go, I have 4 colored paints and then 1 varnish paint here. These are all Vallejo paints. I really like them because for minis that are this small, if you have sort of open container paints, it's really easy for the paint to get dried out. But for this, what we're going to be doing is sort of eyedroppering it onto a plate. That's a verb now, just so you know. And also these are really good paints. They are pretty affordable and readily accessible in a whole bunch of different colors. So we have a white here, and then we have a blue, a gray, and a black. And then the last thing that we have is a varnish that we are going to use to seal the mini when it's done. So those are all the things that you need. There's also these 3 items that I recommend, but are not strictly speaking mandatory. So one of them is this Nuln oil. It's pretty strong stuff, so I've actually diluted this down, which is why it has this homemade label over here. We're going to use that to add definition later. There's also this brown, which is another Vallejo paint, and that is going to be good for some dry brushing that we are going to do. The dry brushing brush that we have is going to be the Army Painter dry brush, and as you may or may not be able to see, let's say maybe, yeah, so these bristles are a little bit rougher around the edges, and that's on purpose because we're going to add some sort of rough around the edges details later. So under normal circumstances, the first thing that you would need to do with your mini is prime it. But most minis that are created nowadays are already pre-primed, so we don't have to do that. In general, the rule for painting miniatures, because they have these super tiny details, is the less paint the better. So if you can do less layers, that's what we want to do. So the first thing that we're going to do, because we have this sort of white and blue situation going on, is we are going to do a very, very light layer of white throughout the whole thing with this guy. So we're going to do that. So after I squeezed out the paint, it's kind of hard to see because it's white on white over here. But what I'm going to do is going to take the biggest brush. I am going to wet it just a little bit in the water. And then I am going to very gently do a quick dab dry on that paper towel, and then we're just going to do a quick layer. Trying our best to keep this layer nice and light because again we've got all these teeny tiny details, and if we have too much paint then they're going to go away, and we don't want that. So I forgot about one optional piece of equipment. As you can see, I just accidentally got some paint on me. No big deal. But that happens when you're trying to kind of negotiate by like painting around a miniature. So I am going to go ahead and get a piece of equipment that is optional but extremely useful. This is a Citadel color stand. So this is super useful and it's only like $12 or something. So what you do is you take your mini and you stretch this base out so that it can hold the mini. The base for this is so big that I don't know if I'm going to be able to hold the whole thing, but I will try to hold at least a little bit. Okay, this is not the most stable situation in the world, but essentially this way I can turn my mini and access different angles without putting my hand in the way, which means less likely for stuff like this to happen. So let's continue with that first layer. So now that I've done this first layer, apologies, everything on this table is so bright. I'm just gonna do a quick sort of rinse and dab of my brush. Notice that I am not putting the bristles of my brush against the cup at all. I'm just sort of like doing a little bit of a shake and putting it in there. And now what we're gonna do is create sort of this middle space, the legs and part of the underside of the spider. The art that I saw online sort of has the edges of the spider legs going from like a lighter blue into a darker blue. This would be a problem if I had two different blues because they wouldn't really go together, but what I can do is that I can mix my own lighter blue. So what I'm going to do is I didn't show this last time, so shake this just a little bit, unscrew the top, put a little bit here, and then we're going to add some white to it. Let's try just a little bit first. And we do need that mixing brush now, so we're going to grab it, wet it just a little. Mix all this stuff together. This is part of the advantage of having a disposable item that you can use for painting, is that I can just keep this mixed paint here. So if I want to add more of this color later but this paint dries, I have this as a reference and I can use it. That's still a little dark for me, so I'm just going to add a little bit more white. We're just mixing until it's all one color. And then we get as much of the paint off the brush as we can. I'm a little rougher with this brush just because it's a mixing brush. It's a mixing brush. Okay, so then I'm going to take our bigger dude again, wet it just a little bit, and then we're going to go to town on these legs. Oh no! Oh no! Okay, I decided to make my life easier and put this plastic circle on the bottom of this. It doesn't fit into the holder anymore, but it is going to make it easier for me to hold. So let's go from here. Go back to wetting the brush just slightly, and then getting just a little bit of the leg. You'll notice that I am getting paint on other parts of the mini. That is okay and normal, and we are gonna fix it later. Okay, so under normal circumstances, I would wait for the paint to dry before continuing, but I want the barrier between this blue and the white to be a little blended. So what I'm going to do for that, you can see that our original white is dry by now, so I'm going to do a little bit more white. Just a little bit. And then I'm gonna take this middle brush, and I'm actually not gonna dry it completely. I'm gonna make it sort of like white with a little water. And then we're gonna just kind of blend these edges a little. You 100% do not have to do this. That is an extra thing. But it does make those edges look a little bit more transitional rather than abrupt. If you get too much water, no big deal. You just take your paper towel and you fix it. So you can see the difference between this side where things are a little bit more transitional and this side where things are a little bit more stark. It's a little easier to see that transition on the side with the wash that we just made. It's looking pretty good. Let's see if we can get it to focus. Not bad. Okay, so now we're going to do the little tiny circles underneath the spider. And to do that, we are going to use our medium brush. Make sure it's nice and patted off. Go back into that sort of mixed blue. And do some of these circles. You 100% do not have to do these teeny tiny details if you don't want to, but for me, this is one of the most fun parts of miniature painting, is getting to do these small details. And the nice thing is, if you mess up, it's not really a big deal, because most of the time your players will not be looking at the teeny tiniest details of your miniatures, so no worries. I used to work in a costume shop. Don't ask me to sew, I'm terrible at sewing. And the director of my costume shop used to say 30 feet and moving, which means everything you do is going to be on someone who's at least 30 feet away and moving, and so don't sweat too much about the details. That being said, if you like sweating about the details, I'm here for it. I'm here for you. I think I'm gonna go back to the darker blue for the top of the spider. Okay, so here's the plan. I want to paint the eyes a lighter color, but as you can see, the eyes are in the middle of the head, and it's going to be really hard to paint the darker color of the head around the eyes. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make sure I have enough of this mixed paint. I don't. So we're going to start by making more of that mixed paint. I'm just going to put it directly on the other mixed paint, so I can be really sure I'm getting the right color. Just as long as I don't cover up the whole original paint, should be fine. Wow, honestly shocked I got that well that first time around. So we're gonna go ahead and clean that off. And for this one, we'll use this medium brush. Looking pretty good. And then we're going to do that same thing we did before with the white, but with the blue this time, where we just, I'm actually going to use the bigger brush for this. I'm going to make the brush a little wet, get some of that lighter blue, and do a little blending. ended up deciding to do a little bit around the edges as well. I just kind of like the look of that, so we'll keep it. We have to wait a little bit before we do the eyes for the paint to be dry. So instead we're going to go back to the legs for a little bit. In the art that I've seen, the tip of the legs are very dark. It almost looks black. I think it might be black, but we're just going to go with dark blue because artistic license. So instead of doing a wash this time around, instead what I did was just paint the legs a little unevenly, so it sort of looked like there are darker spots in some areas. And I think that worked pretty well. I'm just gonna dirty it up a little in a couple of other places so that it looks uneven, because it'd be kind of weird for the colors to abruptly change all in the same way. But that's looking pretty good. So we're gonna let all of that dry and come back to this later. What we are gonna do today is we are gonna work on the fangs, and then we are gonna also work on the eyes. So let's start with the fangs because they're fun. So I'm shaking my glossy black here. And then putting it on a zip plate. Fangs are just fun, y'all. You can't tell me otherwise. Okay, so just getting a little bit of this. Already looking more sinister. Okay, so the eyes that I am seeing online in the arts of phase spiders that I see are like a really light blue, like it's that same blue but almost white. So instead of what I did before where I mixed the blue first and then put white in, I'm going to do the opposite for that. I'm going to put this here and then just a little bit of this. That's pretty good. So I'm gonna rinse this off. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. This is where our insane detail brush comes into play. So I'm gonna wet it and then super gently just dry it off a little bit. And then we're gonna go for the eyes. Yay, so creepy. Okay, so while we are waiting for the eyes to dry, we are next going to paint the base. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab this dark sea gray that we have here, and we're gonna go from there. So I could paint the entire base of this, including the plastic circle, but that's going to look really weird when we add definition later. So I am instead going to paint only this plastic part gray and then touch up the black with some black paint later. Okay, so the bigger brush worked fine for most of the base, but now I'm going to go in with the medium-sized brush to get those parts that are closer to the spider, because I don't actually want to touch the spider. Okay, and now we have to wait for all that to dry. So the last thing that we have to do is go in and fix some of the details. These are kind of hard to see on camera, but you can see I got some gray on the base and a little bit of blue paint here on the white legs, stuff like that. Again, don't stress out about this step too much because 30 feet and moving, or I guess our version of that would be 5 feet and tiny. But if you see any big areas that you know you need to fix, go ahead and go in with it with your teeny tiny brush or your medium brush. I'm going to do that off camera because I will need to get real up close and personal with it. Okay, so we are all done with those details, so let's take a look. Much creepy, very scary, high terror, and as you can see, very different than its sibling, the mini that we started with. So if you want to stop here, it is totally respectable to stop here. I would just recommend putting on a clear layer of varnish, so that's this guy right here, to seal in your paint, just to make sure that that is all cool. But there are a couple of things that you can do to just add a little bit of an extra pop to your mini at this point, and they don't take too long, so we're going to hit them real quick. Okay, we're going to do 2 more short things to add some really cool definition to our mini. So the first thing that we're going to do is add a wash. I really like to use Nuln oil for this. That's Nuln. It's pretty strong stuff, so I actually watered this down a little bit. I took some Nuln oil, used it, and then added a little bit of water in so that it's a little less intense. This is a very similar concept to what we were doing before with the legs. Hiya, Scare. But it is slightly better, honestly. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to shake this for about 5 minutes. See you after that. So now that we've given our wash a little bit of a shake, we are going to lightly coat our spider with this. What it is going to do, it's going to get into the teeny tiny details that I couldn't possibly paint, and kind of like fade in there. So we'll give it a little bit more definition and make it look a little dirtier, which is what we want. We don't really think any of these spiders are going to be pristine. Spiders are gross. So we're taking our big old brush. Yes, baby, it's very scary. You'll notice that I don't always apply more to the brush. Sometimes I'm just kind of moving around the oil that exists on the mini so it isn't as concentrated in a particular area. I'm also going to get the base. This is why I did not paint the whole thing gray, because we are going to get this definition within the base itself, and we won't get it in this piece of plastic. Okay, we're going to let that dry and come back to it. So as you can see, that's looking a lot grodier, a lot nastier. And a lot of those little details, like the circles on the underside, are a lot better defined. So that's the advantage to using a wash, so you get a little bit more definition here. So the last thing that we are going to do is do a little bit of dry brushing. For that, we are going to need a little bit of that brown paint I mentioned earlier, a mostly dry paper towel, our dry brush, and our mini. So dry brushing is exactly what it sounds like. What you're going to do is you're going to take just a little bit of paint on your brush, and then you're gonna rub most of it off so that there's just a little bit left. And then when that happens, you are going to dust a little bit of paint around the areas that you think the mini would have it. So if we're talking about mud here, I think probably the belly and some of the legs. So we're gonna start there. So I did a little bit too much on the belly, so I am trying to diffuse it a little bit by getting as much out as I can on my dry brush and then just spreading it around a little bit. And then we'll also get a little bit of the ground, because the ground is probably dirty too. So that's looking pretty good. We're gonna wait for that all to dry, and then we're gonna seal it with varnish. Okay, so the very last thing that we need to do is seal our mini with a little bit of varnish. The purpose of using varnish is to just protect your mini a little bit from the elements and from people touching it. We're just going to do a really light layer on top of the whole thing. If you get too much varnish on a mini, it definitely can show, so try to keep the layer light and diffuse whatever giant globs you put on accidentally, like what I just did. But keep it light if you can. The nice thing is, this will probably give those eyes a little bit of an extra shine, which is always fun. So as you can see, the washed and dry brushed version looks a lot grosser than the original version that we had. Totally not a necessary step, but it is one that will give monsters like this the extra ick factor, or if you have players on the table, it will look like they are weathered and have been sleeping out in the woods, because they probably have. So it's a really good way to add some definition and some details, and it's pretty easy. That's it! Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to see you next time on Unfinished Business. Remember, you're champions, you're scholars, and you have great boobs. We love you.